those. I'm starting to build that schedule for next semester's convocations. So if you have suggestions, send me an email there in Canvas. And then finally, just remember that you should register to vote. You can do so by the end of October to vote in the November election. And there's a lot of resources online where you can find candidates' positions and some details. But registering to vote is really easy. Just go to vote.utah.gov or other sites on the internet. So please just put away your phones. Hopefully you don't have any food with you. Keep your feet on the floor, all of our etiquette things. There will probably be some time at the end for questions and answers. So let me introduce our candidate, or our speaker, who is a candidate. She's Utah's Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate, and she's a fifth-generation Utahn. Jenny Wilson's record demonstrates a strong commitment to Utah, where she was born and is raising her family. In 2004, Jenny became the first woman to be elected to the Salt Lake City Council, and she's currently serving her second 6-year term. She represents a third of our state's population there in the Salt Lake Valley. And on this county council, Jenny has had great success working with Republicans to forge consensus on issues that affect the daily lives of all Utah families while keeping the county budget balanced. In her political work, Jenny also prioritizes healthcare, compassionate immigration reform, small businesses, and infrastructure improvements in Utah's rural and urban communities. In addition to her service in government, Jenny Wilson has a strong experience working in the private and nonprofit sectors, serving in key positions for the Sundance Institute and Film Festival, the 2002 Olympic Winter Games, Voices for Utah Children, and the University of Utah's John A. Moran Eye Center. And most recently, Wilson directed and produced a documentary film, The Grand Rescue, which aired on PBS stations across the country. And it's the story of a 1967 rescue on the north face of Grand Teton. And it was a time in which her father, Ted Wilson, was one of the Park Service rescuers. We're thrilled to hear from Jenny Wilson today. Would you join me in welcoming her?
Well, thank you. All right, I got to get this right. Stand in front of the speakers typically, but I don't know if I can do that. So, well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It was a really pleasant drive down on a beautiful day, and we are 40 days away from Election Day, if you can believe it or not, which is exciting for me. I've been out this for a while, so to kind of see the clock ticking down is a very exciting thing, and it's always fun after Labor Day. Students are more engaged, residents are more engaged, voters are starting to ask questions, and it really, the lid really comes off the kettle right after the World Series, so I think it's going to ramp up even more. Let me share with you a little about myself. I'm a fifth-generation Utahn, and I have this really big, extended Utah family. And those of you from Utah kind of get that. I have a lot of cousins. And I have a little bit of an issue with Ephraim, and I'm going to tell you why. So my mom has an older brother, Claire. He has 5 kids. I'm one of 5. She's the next in line. And then my mom has 3 brothers and sisters that are younger, or 2 rather, and they have big families. But growing up, we didn't have a lot of cousins because I'm one of the older ones. The cousins all lived in California. So my favorite cousins were Lisa and Cinda, and for every summer, I had this great opportunity when their station wagon would pull in to Salt Lake City, where I'm from, to spend a week with my cousins. And we would go to Lagoon, we would hang out. My grandparents were wonderful to come up with all sort of activities for us. My uncle and aunt who were visiting, it was just the best time and the best memories. But on day 7, or maybe it was day 10 that year, the station wagon would pull away to the other cousins in Ephraim. So my association with Ephraim is just sort of losing Lisa and Cinda and the fun and the watermelon and the trips to Lagoon. So it's taken me a few years to connect with this community in a different way. So if you'll help me recover today, join me for lunch. It'd be fun to chat a little. And I won't hold it against you that my childhood's mind still is angry at the other cousins and Ephraim. So with that, I want to just touch on your journey for a second. I'm sure each of you found your own pathway here, unique pathways, but most of you probably had a conversation with friends or family members, parents who said this is a good choice for you, but somewhere along the way you made this commitment to higher education. And in a day where we have so much unrest, challenges, issues facing our nation, issues facing our state, the importance of higher education cannot be underexpressed. You are learning, you are engaging, you're solving problems. I'm sure on this campus you have Democrats and Republicans, and you come together and you don't sit on opposite sides of this auditorium. And sadly, that's what we're seeing in Congress right now. And you're also, as you solve problems, preparing yourself not just for your careers, but you're preparing yourselves to contribute to the community in the years to come. And I think that is really, when I look back on my education at the University of Utah, I think that was one of the strongest things. I went on years later to a mid-career school, or a mid-career program at Harvard, Master's in Public Administration. I graduated from the U in 1988, and my Harvard degree is 1998. And I really cherish sort of the relationships I still have and the learning that took place friend to friend and teacher to friend, and my engagement within the community as a whole. And I think that has really enriched my community life and my political life. So thank you for making the choice that you made to sit in this seat today and be a member of this campus. Now, I want to talk a little about government, my experience, and why I'm running for the US Senate. I had the opportunity, returning from Harvard, to kind of settle into life in Utah. And I realized at one point, having worked for a congressman in DC, I worked for Bill Orton, who represented much of rural Utah and Utah County in the 90s, that I was at this point thinking, what now? I care about my community. I've had this touch in government. My father was the mayor of Salt Lake City growing up. What now? And I really felt that I'd come to the point in my career where I would be able to step up. And when I ran for office in 2004, I didn't know the outcome. I was challenging a Republican incumbent. And Salt Lake County is sort of a swing county, can go either way. We have a Democratic mayor now, and we have a Democratic sheriff, and 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats on my county council, and I knew that it was going to be a battle to win, but I thought I did my best to share positions. I cared and care still about growth management in Salt Lake County, about keeping the economy moving, preservation of the Wasatch, which is so utilized by members of the state and certainly by people, my neighborhood, city, and county, whether it be skiing or hiking or what have you. So these are the things that really were important to me. Clean air. And I stepped up one and am now in my second 6-year term on the Salt Lake County Council. We've done a number of things there that I think are exciting, related to addressing a lot of the growth and need in the community. And I've touched on a couple of things. One of the things that I did, though, when I was first elected was reform government. Salt Lake County desperately needed a new face. We'd had some scandals prior to my time there. Our auditor was actually stealing gas by pulling up a second car on his county gas card and filling the second car. And then driving it for personal use. We had a mayor who was doing things that shouldn't have been done in terms of hiring her own family members in jobs that weren't outlined as approved. And we ended up having a real black eye. And we were able to cross party lines, pass ethics reforms, and I spearheaded those work groups and put those together and passed those reforms. And I think that's really important when we look at Washington and need there. We are in the need of reform at the national level right now. Additionally, I was able to move LGBTQ rights. Now remember, this was 2004, long before marriage equality. And I was approached by an employee who said, I have a lifelong partner, my adult life partner, we can't marry, and I can't get her on the county health benefits. And there are many of us at this county that agree that that is the fair and right thing to do, and we're missing out. And it's hard to go without insurance. And then we, of course, at Salt Lake County had so-called traditional families with several children on our county health care plan. So I worked on that. It took some time. It didn't pass on the first vote. We were able to pass domestic partner benefits at Salt Lake County, which provided that health insurance. And that's one of the things I'm very proud of, and just one of the things that was important to me. And I think now we have marriage equality, so that benefit is not as important, but it really did fill in for over a decade the need, or close to a decade, the need for people who really deserve that insurance and was a benefit to our employees. So that's something that I worked on as well. And I have really enjoyed the opportunity that I've had on the county council to work on these more urban county issues. But I'm also a member of the Utah Association of Counties, and I'm on their board. And what I've found is that we have more in common, a Salt Lake City girl like me, with a county elected. And we have more in common than divide us. I have amazing partners that I meet with on a very regular basis, and we're addressing jail reform. Jail reform at Salt Lake County, we have a pretty large jail population of about 2,000 plus minus. Our county jails have a much smaller number of inmates, but we're all committed to healthcare reform. We're trying to figure out the equation on how we release people into the community so we don't see recidivism, and that's a real problem. And we've worked collaboratively on these issues. There'll be times, I'll tell you, I have to speak up because I see it a little differently. And I'm respected for that. And what I've found with that engagement is that this myth that rural and urban have this great division, we have a division on public lands, I've found that we can work together to solve problems. And I have great county commissioner friends from the rural areas that I have a difference with regarding land preservation and where we need to go in the future. I've come out in favor of the Obama-drawn boundaries of the Grand Staircase, which were actually Clinton, and then the Obama-drawn boundaries of Bears Ears. And we have that difference. We talk it through, but I do think we have, again, so much in common. I agree with them that we can reform the BLM. I have fought for payment in lieu of taxes in rural areas. I know many of you come from areas that rely on that land, and the fact that each county is only getting 80 cents to $1 an acre in compensation for the federal land is a big problem. That is the safety net for rural communities. My county runs primarily on a property tax. There is no property tax in a community when 90% of the land, or very little, 10%, is taxed to pull into the coffers. And that's where we have challenges at the federal level, connecting to the state down to your local communities. And I'm a big advocate for the payment in lieu of taxes. And I actually really enjoyed telling one of my rural county commissioners on the phone when he called me one day asking if I could help reach out to Democratic senators, that I would be happy to make those phone calls. And I did make those phone calls, and I did go to Washington, D.C. and call for an increase in payment in lieu in taxes, but I had to make sure that I reminded him that it was the Trump budget that zeroed them out, and in the end, I was happy to make the phone call back when I said it was Ron Wyden of Oregon that did the heavy lifting, committee member, and an advocate for the payment in lieu of taxes that reinstated that funding to the budget. And that's one of my central messages. Look, I'm a Democrat. I want to serve Utah in the United States Senate. But in this day where we see presidents of both parties, depending year to year to year, we don't have a crystal ball and know what's going to happen, but it's pretty safe to assume that we're going to continue to see a movement from one party to the next in the decades to come, from a Republican president to a Democrat, back and forth. Same is true of the very narrow balance in our House of Representatives and our Senate. So for Utah to have a Jim Matheson and a Bill Orton, my former boss, as Democrats in a Republican delegation is a very good thing for this state. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that I hear on the campaign trail. I'm often asked, when you're out visiting rural Utah, does everyone talk about Trump? What's the deal with Trump? And I can honestly say what people say to me far more than what, even mentioning the president, is two things. One is, why is government so divided? And what can you do? And they also say, we have a need in rural Utah, and we have a need for jobs and good wages. So when it comes to the division, I can promise you here in this audience that I will fight and work to restore civility. I do it on my Salt Lake County Council. I tend to be pretty tough-minded when I have an opinion, but I always make an effort to listen, to try and find common ground, and to work towards solutions. And that's been really the model that has worked to get things done at Salt Lake County. And my Republican counterparts would share exactly that. We don't always agree with Jenny, but she listens, she's respectful, she engages, and I will do that in the United States Senate, serving this state first. When it comes to jobs, I think there's a lot we can do. I mentioned working for Orton in the 90s. I toured rural Utah then, as I do now. I toured Utah in a different way for many years in between, which was, gas up my car, come down, enjoy rural Utah, maybe go to Moab, head on down to Zion, come here in this region to visit friends or what have you. But it's a very different situation to engage with a community when you are out campaigning. And they'll tell you, people will tell you about their needs. I met a woman in, let me think where it was. It was Moab, actually. She came up to me at a forum, pulled me aside, and said, at one point in my life here, I had 5 jobs. 5 jobs. And wages in tourism communities don't keep up with inflation, don't keep up with basic needs. So there are some jobs where there's a stronger pathway, but they're few and far between. So I really feel we need to figure out the solution, and the federal government is a part of it. State government has a big hand in this, of course, and your local government. The federal government has a lot of tools that can support our communities. There are retooling dollars that need to be applied in areas where coal mines have shut down. There are opportunities through the NASA budget, through the health budget, through several budgets where we can find better ways to support development in these communities. And I'm going to be honest, when I was down on the reservation, I met with Native Americans and we got into a discussion about their basic needs. And frankly, in that area, there are a lot of places without running water, which I find absolutely unbelievable in 2018 that we can still have in a prosperous state like Utah areas without running water. And when we had these conversations, I said, well, okay, let me know. Well, I understand that Orrin Hatch, it's not easy to get down to Four Corners, to Monticello, to Blanding, to that area, to the reservation. And Orrin Hatch is a busy senator. Who's your contact? And they looked at me and they said, we don't have a contact. And I found that to be unforgivable. And so I made a commitment. I will be in every one of your counties next year in 2019 as a U.S. Senator, engaging with you, listening to you, figuring out the agenda for the community. And I think what the winning formula that I've seen in areas where there is some ability to bring in tourism, if you can have some tourism jobs, if you can market those jobs, if you have a basic industry, in this area, it's the seat you're sitting in, it's the college and its ability to hire, bring people in, and have the restaurants, the movie theater, et cetera, that spin off. And that formula, some communities are stronger if they have that combined formula. And I think the federal government in its power, I mean, we found $2 trillion in my opinion, a tax giveaway to the very wealthy. We can find some money to invest in rural Utah and get the payment in lieu of taxes up. And that's a commitment that I make to rural Utah. So before I move on, I want to just share a story. I was out, I mentioned the family, or the woman rather, in Moab. And I happened to have this experience driving through Emery County one day. We almost ran out of gas. And where's Abby and Allie? Oh, there they are. Oh, there's Abby. I have amazing staff, but we were a little light on gas, and we had this great adventure making it in, and we did. So we made it in. We made it to the pizza parlor in Emery County. Can't think of the pizza place. But there was this family that greeted us, and it was a younger dad. I'm in my early 50s. I've got to think he was mid-40s maybe. His kids were in their 20s and late teens. And I asked the question, what is it that is on your mind? And the Smith family went on one by one to tell me, we live in Emery County, we love it here, we have a very diverse life here. The older of the sons was 20 some odd years old, early 20s, and he was a self-taught computer scientist, I guess, and had learned a lot by just on his own, figuring out through exploring the internet and other ways, and conversations with the community of people who knew a lot about computer science, had kind of figured some cool things out. And he felt really interested in finding work in that area, but he was working a construction job because there wasn't a job there that paid enough that would align with what he knew and with his interest. And the other son was high school, and he wanted to stay and be a teacher. And their dad, and the mom wasn't there at this dinner that we had over pizza. She was, I think, working in the medical services area and was off working. But the dad shared with me that he desperately wanted his kids to stay in that community. And they wanted to stay, but they didn't have opportunity. And I really fear if we don't change how we support rural Utah, we're going to see more and more of that. And the heart of our state is Ephraim, Utah, Price, Utah, these areas. I love my life on the Wasatch Front, but I find my soul and connection as I move about the state that I love. So I want to talk a little about some solutions and what we can do. I really believe that while we have this incredible quality of life, we can build upon it by investment in technology in these communities, by bringing broadband to these communities, by bringing services, and by really connecting with our state government with an action plan for our communities. And as I look at each of your futures and your opportunities and your life ahead, I think we're in the best state in the nation. We have so much here. You're so close, kind of center of the state, to not too far from hopping over to 15 and heading to Vegas, or heading up to Salt Lake City, or heading east into Colorado, or west into Nevada. So you're geographically in a really great place to have such a range of opportunity, and I think that's very special. And our public lands are very, very critical, I think, to our identity as Utahns. They are mine as a lifelong Utahn. It's very much the heart of my sort of being, and my sense of my broader kind of life beyond my core everyday life in a smaller U.S. city. But I worry a little about the cost of student loans for you. And I believe there are solutions. I believe we can modify our financial services industry to create more consumer protection for people with student loans. We shouldn't have predatory practices for people who go to school. That seems simple enough. We can solve that. We can come together and solve that. Housing costs are going up, both on the Wasatch Front where I live. It's a big problem in my county council life right now, how we manage growth. Most of you have been to Salt Lake City. Most of you probably spent a lot of time there. You get it. Pollution, growth, demands. But when it comes to housing, I do have big concerns, and I think that we need to prioritize housing over the next decade at the federal level from Utah's delegation and the state level and in our local communities. If you ask millennials, do you think you're gonna own a home? It doesn't look so good. 7 in 10 think it will be difficult to get a mortgage. 1 in 10 have frankly given up on the idea that they're gonna own a home. And we know that 40% of millennials are still renting by the age of 30. And I don't have the stat for how many people are living in their parents' basements going into 30, 35, but it's probably more than when I was about that age 20 years ago. So I believe to solve these issues, we need a new generation of leaders in Washington. I grew up in the era of Orrin Hatch. I grew up in those years where he was working with Ted Kennedy and creating, across party lines, the Children's Health Insurance Program that has provided a safety net for children in poverty in this state and in this nation. Yet he abandoned that advocacy this past year. I don't like his actions in the last week or two. We need change. We need a new generation of leaders who get it, who are from our communities. I met a woman, I was at a conference in Chicago not long ago, and I was at a reception, and somebody introduced me to another candidate running for Congress, and she was another one of the, I don't know how many are still on the ballot, I think it's a few hundred of us that qualified for our party nominations, but there were thousands, or more than 1,000, I should say, that stepped up to run for office this year. And she remains a candidate in Ohio for Congress, challenging a Republican incumbent. And within minutes, we had connected on our work around the opioid crisis. And we had this amazing connection. We both have kids. We both fear the effect of the opioid crisis for our own children's future and for our friends and our broader community's future. And we know how, and we shared stories of how, and this is, I was sharing with her that no matter the group that I'm speaking to, someone, when I bring up my work on the opioid crisis, shares that they've lost a family member, or that somebody in their family, or they themselves have suffered addiction, or are suffering addiction. And it's a problem. So I think, I think about Jill, who I met, who's running in Ohio, younger than me, 2 kids. Me, I would be the first woman elected from the state of Utah to the US Senate. I am a little bit different than Mike Lee, Mitt Romney and Orrin Hatch, certainly. And I really believe we need people who have been embedded in our communities, who have fought to find those solutions for the opioid crisis, who've worked to protect our lands, who've stood up for things that really matter to people. Lower payments on student loans. I know how hard it is. My husband and I plan our vacations. We have to work to make sure, and we're not doing as well as we should, on a college fund for our children. We have to, pick up our dog at daycare or a doggy day on occasion. We care for our children. I think we need people who have done that in a way that's really embedded in the community. And that's what I represent. And with that, you get my commitment, not just to serve my own interests in trying to figure all this out, but to serve yours first. So I want to talk for a minute about something that's on my mind. And I'll see if I can pull this off, because it's one thing to watch the division in Washington. And it's also another thing to try and make sense of it from a current public official point of view, as well as somebody seeking the highest office in our land, the US Senate. Or I have to rephrase that. It's not the highest office. That would be our presidency, but one of the highest office, the US Senate. And the wheels have been turning in my head about the days that I worked in Washington, D.C. And the fact that we were divided then. And when people say, well, Washington's been divided for a long time, yes, it has been. But it is so incredibly divided today that I look at the 40 days that are left to go and I think, I feel very compelled to serve this state, but it will be hard because of the division. I don't mind the policy work. I don't mind the moving van. I don't mind adjusting my family's life, and they don't mind either. But the division right now is really, really harming our ability to govern. And I believe that we need citizens to speak up. We need you to continue to contact all of your elected officials. And we need people to say, it's time we come and work towards real solutions. And I think it's important in this day and age, with what's going on today, that we recognize that sexual assault is a reality. And that Utah is not immune from that. In fact, we know that 1 in 3 will face that. 1 in 3. And 1 in 9 will actually face a rape. And those statistics are from the Utah Health Department. And I think, we sometimes will state things that we assume about violent attacks in alleyways, or, I grew up not far from Elizabeth Smart, and I'm so proud of her voice in addressing this issue head on. And of course, her situation is more unique, of course. What we know is these assaults are happening in homes, they're happening in apartments, they're happening in dorms, they're happening in situations that are not those dark alleys. And I think that it's important that, I look at the Senate, I look at the composition on the Judiciary Committee, and I am concerned that the Republicans maybe don't have the experience I have in talking to friends who have faced those challenges. And I think that it's important we elect women and we have women step up and say, yeah, I have something to say in my community. I have an experience that I can bring to government. And I've been in touch with Jan Graham recently, the only woman to be elected from the state of Utah. And she said it's a pretty lonely club, right? So to the women in the room, I think when we see some of the challenges today, and not just sexual assault, it's domestic violence, it's being treated fairly. And if you would just engage a little more, consider yourselves worthy to run for public office. Consider yourselves worthy and ready, because you are. And I think conversations with more women engaged is a good thing in public life. And I have 2 little boys. I do my best, as does my ethical husband, to raise them in the right way. And I want to thank all the men in the room who get it, who are acting with respect, who continue to, and compliment you. I think it's important we say that. And this morning, as I watched the testimony by Christine Blasey Ford started this morning at 10 a.m., which is 8 a.m. I left my house at about 9:30, so I was able to see most of her testimony. And I find her account completely credible. And I think that's the assumption we need to make from the beginning in these cases, because we do know, again, 1 in 3 and 1 in 9 in this state is raped. So when she came forward, I was very disheartened to see Orrin Hatch immediately, whose seat I am seeking to take, call her mixed up. And this body, who traditionally calls for investigation, said no. And even though I have a bias in favor, because I've listened to her today, I think an investigation is so important at this juncture. As far as I know, we're still planning on a vote tomorrow. A vote should not happen until the full investigation proceeds. And it would be a disadvantage if indeed he were seated in the future for his benefit to govern without that. Again, I watched today. I think she's credible. I don't know why she would step up and do what she did today. She said, I am 100% certain it was Brett Kavanaugh. I believed her, but I think the FBI should go in and ask the questions necessary, and we are rushing with a vote tomorrow, and I feel very strongly about that. And I join the Mormon Women for Ethical Government, Utah's Mormon Women for Ethical Government, in supporting that and asking for that investigation. closing, I want to thank you for your commitment to your community, to your school, for your engagement. I thank you for being good citizens and being part of great families and for everything that you bring. I think it's so great. I've heard there's a lot of students here that aren't from Utah. From those of you that are from Utah, I hope you share the love that I have for this state and will continue to be engaged. And I look forward to the successes that you have. I'm so excited about college students today and your drive, your innovation, your problem solving, your engagement in your communities, and I wish you the best. So thank you so much. Okay, so typical me, I went too long. My staff always gives me a hard time. So I probably have time for one. I don't know who the cut me off person is. I can take a question or two.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks. Yes. Oh, I'll go with you and then back to you. Yeah.
In a traditionally Republican state, you're facing a huge challenge running as a Democrat. What are your plans if you don't succeed?
So if I don't succeed, I go back to my county council seat. In fact, I don't go back because I am a county council member now, but I will have a 2 years remaining on my term till 2020. So I will continue to serve on the Salt Lake County Council. And people have asked me in writing and personally when I come up, will you run again? And I think it's sort of like coming up to me. I have 2 boys, and like a month before I'm ready to deliver, one of them say, are you gonna have another kid? And I'm like, no way. So right now I'd probably say no, but we'll get through this and then see. But I really believe we see really good trends with our undecideds, and I feel pretty good right now. So 40 days to go. I'll cross that bridge the day after, but I will return, as I do now, to regular service on the Salt Lake County Council. Yes. Oh, and then back here after this one.
You claim that you will be a defender of rural Utah.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, will you condemn the arguably evil ideologies that are taking over the Democratic Party that directly contradict the values of the majority of rural Utahns, such as socialism, radical feminism, and abortion? And do you want to completely disregard the Constitution and assuming the guilt of every rape victim?
Well, I addressed where I am today on the sexual assault issue. I don't even know where to begin. That's sort of a loaded question. But just as you see a continuum of thought in the Republican Party, there's a continuum of thought in the Democratic Party. And I have a very precise website. I don't consider myself a socialist. I am somebody who works across party lines. I don't know what else I can answer for you.
It just doesn't seem like you're too dedicated to what majority of rural Utahns consider to be.
So, and I think what I want people to judge me on is my actions as a public official and where I stand as it relates to delivering. And I can tell you I'm working on jail issues with rural Utahns. I support PILT payments. I've been transparent about where I stand on the monuments, but think that our cultural war on land can end, because I do see some areas we can come together. I support the BLM reforming. I think there are a lot of things the BLM can loosen up on as it relates to how we manage much of our land. So I think I've been a champion, and I will continue to work on it. And we obviously have a difference in ideology, and I respect you, even though I see clearly that we have that difference. And how about you?
I don't have a question.
Okay. Yes.
What's your stance on net neutrality?
Well, I believe that the idea of corporations without the controls that have been in place coming in and taking over our problem. So I support net neutrality, and I've been an advocate for it and will continue to be. I think that I look at my college life even in a very different era and the benefits you have without that that's sort of the impacts that will come through if we were to lose that. And I think it's the Federal Communications Commission's actions recently, I think, have threatened that, and I have concerns. And I think net neutrality is actually moving it is one of the issues that has more bipartisan support than others, so I'm pretty confident and hopeful that we'll be able to keep it in place. Yes?
What's your position on legalizing marijuana?
I'm against the legalization of recreational marijuana, but I support the initiative, and I'm in favor of the initiative as written. I do think there are some things that can be changed. The initiative requires, as does the federal law, that dispensaries be put in communities, and I prefer pharmacies, and I think that's something actually our federal delegation has dropped the ball on. I mean, I think there can be a better advocate, or there should be more advocates from our federal delegation working towards the change that's necessary at the federal level to allow cannabis to be distributed in pharmacies rather than dispensaries. So I think we should pass it as written, and then if there are things that need to be tweaked that we can legally, we should do that. And the federal law change is a biggie, and I would work on that. Yes?
Mitt Romney, when he was here, he talked about how the world needs more American leadership. Do you agree?
More what again, sorry?
American leadership.
More American leadership. I'd have to listen to the context of, I guess, to see what...
The idea of what he was saying is basically like the values that America has. I think the world needs more of that.
The world needs more of America's leadership. I think it sort of depends on the issue. I think we have such amazing people in this nation. I think we have an amazing Constitution. I'm a patriot in the sense that I look at the foundation of our country, what we did to create independence, how we've been able to modify over the years to meet the needs of our communities. I feel we've got challenges right now, but I think what makes me most proud of America is how we stepped up in World War II and supported our allies, and that we are stronger together as we align with Europe, and our NATO alliances have been so critical to our ethics and our national security and who we are as a nation. I think that's the best of the United States. So in the sense that the leadership that I've seen in the past from both parties that really hold to that ethic, I fully believe in, and I think if that's what Mitt Romney meant, then we would agree. Yes?
Will you defend the Constitution of the United States?
I will.
Do you plan on fighting for teachers' wages?
So the question is, what would I do to fight for teachers' wages? It's a really important point. I think we look at our public servants and low wages, and we look at the need for education success. And I think one of the challenges in our state is that we have a high birth rate and a lot of kids, and that is leading to not enough investment. So I actually support the ballot question that is on this year to provide an additional tax to stream into the school system. And I think that really where we look at opportunities to cut and to modify, we have to actually apply those savings to education, because education's the root of every success that we have. An educated population, I touched on domestic violence. If the woman has an education, has the ability to go out and find the resources she needs, find jobs that work for her, she's in a much better position. Education's also provides the platform for life advancement and quality of life, and I think that early investment, a dollar invested now is a dollar very well spent that will pay off not only from cost savings, but it's the ethical and right thing to do.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yes?
So you'll defend the Constitution, not the Second
The Second Amendment is an interesting question. Thank you for asking. So I'd never been asked my position on the Second Amendment because I'm a local official, and the state controls in this state. I mean, there's the federal piece to this as well. But I don't have the ability as a county elected to modify local gun laws in the state of Utah. So when I started to look at what I would state as my position, I have a full explanation of it online. I really struggled with it because, and I did a lot of research. And Scalia, very conservative justice, actually reviewed the Second Amendment and did say that there could be some limitation on one's gun ownership, and that the Second Amendment is not, there is the ability to modify and create some level of restriction. So that begs the question as to where and why. And I actually came out with an assault weapon, a semi-automatic assault weapon ban support, and that is based on the fact that I think that when you look at our rights for life, liberty, there are many communities in our nation that are really living in fear in many situations. And it's a hard one, I know, in rural Utah. I don't support confiscating guns, even semi-automatics. But I believe that the production forward can be limited and should be limited because, when you have I happened to be in Vegas just a few days after the shooting, and I looked at the distance. I was on the street looking at the distance to the Mandalay Bay, knowing the power of that weapon. And I also know that in the mass shootings that our students are facing, or on the site there in Vegas and in nightclubs or what have you, the power of a weapon of war is much more destructive than a shotgun, than another weapon, and the time that it takes to shoot a semi-automatic and the power of that can do far, far more destruction, including the impact on one's body by a hit from that type of weapon compared to another. So it was a tough decision for me because I don't want to convey that I don't believe someone who has concern about their well-being or concern about the government or enjoys hunting should lose their weapon. But I think we have to find that line, and that's where I landed. All right, well, thank you. I appreciate being here. I appreciate your time.